Good afternoon and welcome to Bilslie Research School webinars looking at early years practice, evidence-informed practice in the early years. I'm Joanne Clifton. I'm head of the curriculum and virtual learning for the Elliott Foundation, and I'm really glad to be joined today by research associates from across our Multi-Academy Trust. These are Alice Francis, who works at Pinkwell School in London, Anne Hopkins from Millfield in East Anglia, and Jill Devlin, who's from Chandos in Birmingham, which will bring together some great expertise nationally to share with us today. I think this is the ideal moment to be reflecting on what we know about great practice in the early years. Over the period of time of the pandemic, we know that some of our youngest children will have been particularly affected by the time that they've lost from being in school. I think at this moment, it's ideal to reflect about great early years practice and think about how we can do our very best for the children as the schools open more widely. So this is the third in a series of webinars led by Bilslie Research School. The first was, how can an effective environment enhance learning? The second was a research-based approach to delivering high quality early literacy. And today we're looking at maths, starting with the evidence, improving early maths. And I'm going to hand over here to our research associate, Alice Francis, to take us through the first part of our webinar tonight.
Thank you, Jo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Francis and I'm the Early Years Lead at Pinkwell Primary School in Hayes, just outside of London. Today's webinar has been based on the guidance report written by the Educational Endowment Foundation on improving mathematics in early years and Key Stage 1. As many of us will be aware, children's early mathematical understanding is strongly associated with their later school achievement and therefore has a major impact on young people's educational progress and life outcomes. As seen by the researcher Greg Duncan, he found that math skill predicts career success better than such behaviours, for example, being able to sit still and pay attention, or how well a student gets on with his peers or teachers. It was even found to be a greater indicator of success than literacy skills. In 2018, 66% of disadvantaged children achieved at least the expected level of development for number at the end of early years foundation stage. This is compared to the 82% of their peers. As we know, once children fall behind, it is hard for them to catch up, and children are more likely to continue on this trajectory throughout their whole school life. This is one reason why we are here today, to make sure we start early and that all children, regardless of background, have access to great mathematics teaching in early years. The EEF guidance recommends 5 practical supportive mechanisms, which we are going to explore in more detail today. Please note that implementing these recommendations will require careful consideration for how they will fit in your early years setting, as all settings are slightly different. It is vital that the starting block to improve mathematics in the early years starts with developing practitioners' own understanding of mathematics, their understanding of how children learn and how this translates into effective pedagogy. Numerous studies indicate that it is important for early years practitioners to understand young children's mathematical development, such as the typical stages in learning to count and to understand how to assess its development. We will come on to this a little bit later. First, we need to ensure our early years setting concentrates on supportive relationships with children by staff knowing individual children well. A setting which promotes highly children's curiosity, thinking and problem solving. also where children are engaging in appropriate and cognitively challenging activities. Mathematical development involves forming connections between concepts, such as understanding that addition is the inverse of subtraction. It also involves children developing reasoning skills, such as logical thinking and the ability to justify and explain their ideas. However, the trajectory of mathematical development does not only rely on specific mathematical knowledge, but also the skills of the ability to hold information in your mind and manipulate it in our working memory, self-regulation and metacognition, language skills which enable effective communication of mathematical ideas and mathematical language for new ideas, gross and fine motor skills for counting and writing numerals, children's prior experience with mathematical materials, and lastly, children's attitudes towards mathematics. This is why it is vital that staff know individual children extremely well in order to be able to support them on their early mathematical journey. Self-regulation is a term which refers to the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions, behaviour and thoughts in all different scenarios. To be able to successfully complete a mathematical task, children must be able to self-regulate, and therefore the development of self-regulation is linked to successful learning in early maths. Here you can see a picture of the Zones of Regulation framework. The Zones of Regulation framework was written by Leah M. Cypers. This teaches children to develop a metacognitive pathway which builds awareness of their feelings and their internal state. It utilises a variety of tools and strategies for regulation and wellness. This programme provides a common language throughout a compassionate framework which supports positive mental health and skill development for all. As practitioners, we can support children to develop the skills of regulation and metacognition by describing the strategies used by children and linking the thinking and learning as a model. For example, I can see that you're finding it difficult to concentrate. Shall we go and find a quieter place to work where we won't be disturbed? We can also model our own problem solving by thinking out loud. This can also be modelled when we get stuck and reflecting on what strategies we could use to help ourselves. The research on children learning mathematical concepts has revealed the complexity of mathematical development, as children can appear to have grasped an idea in one context, but then not be able to show that knowledge in a different context. There are numerous developmental progression models and paths. Some models are more simple than others. This diagram shows that the most important content goals, which are namely conceptual understanding and procedural fluency for early mathematics, are the big ideas of mathematical education. These are ideas that connect concepts and skills within a domain and across domains. The spiral highlights the progression of individual skills or concepts that develop over time. The spiral shows that there is some ordering in which the skills may emerge. Development does not take place in clear linear steps. Children can develop several skills in parallel, and individual children may move through the skills in a different order. But to reach a full understanding, children will need to master each skill. Across all three topic areas, there is a considerable overlap, where children need to understand the ideas of composition and decomposition, pulling together and taking part what is fundamental to both number and arithmetic. For example, part-whole relations, adding and subtracting, and also geometry, shape composition. These diagrams should support practitioners to have a good understanding of what children need to learn to progress. Make judgments about the range of experiences children will need to develop to have a full understanding of the topic. Determine the developmental prerequisites for a particular skill. Assess the children's level of understanding and intervene at the appropriate level of challenges. Here you can see the 4 steps on the early learning trajectory involving number and counting. Step 1, verbal supervising, which is where children immediately recognise the total, the cardinal value, of a collection without counting and labelling that total with an appropriate number word. The ability to verbally supervise collections up to about 3 is a key fundamental and a key foundation for all other verbal-based number and arithmetic concepts and skills. Here you can see 2 children using dominoes to supervise successfully. They are also using patterns of the dots on dice and matching with the number block cards as a cardinal value. Step 2, meaningful object counting. Counting a collection using one number word per object to determine the total or cardinal value of a collection. Children begin to learn the counting sequence 1, 2, 3, 4 early, but counting by rote does not mean that children hold any comprehensive knowledge to each number. Children need to learn to coordinate number words with pointing to each item in a collection and knowing that the last number word represents the total of all items counted, which is called the cardinality principle. Here you can see children have used manipulatives to represent the cardinal principle from a number card or a tree. Step 3, verbal-based magnitude comparisons. Using verbal subtilizing or one-for-one counting to determine the numerical relation. For example, same number or more between collections first, and then using a mental representation of the counting sequence to specify the numerical relation between words. Children who achieve the first 2 steps might not understand the numerical relations among number words. They need to learn concepts and vocabulary from more and fewer, and then use supervising, matching and counting to determine which of the 2 collections have more or fewer items. Here you can see that the children used conkers as a manipulative and represented numbers and then compared the representations by using specific vocabulary, more or less. Step 4, adding and subtracting. Once children can quantify collections meaningfully and understand verbal-based number relations, they are ready to solve basic addition and subtraction word problems. Here they can apply the basic skills and ideas they have learned to solve word problems with small collections. Here you can see children's early mathematical counting skills, one step further along where they are solving simple addition and subtraction problems and using a number line to explain the reasons behind their answers. Finally, another educational goal must not be neglected. The habits of the mind include curiosity, imagination, inventiveness, risk-taking, creativity, and persistence. Children need to view mathematics as sensible, useful, and worthwhile, and view themselves as capable of thinking mathematically. Children should also come to appreciate the beauty and creativity that is at the heart of mathematics. I am now going to hand over to Anne, who will talk you through integration of maths throughout the day and the use of manipulatives.
Good afternoon, I'm Anne Hopkins and I lead the early years team at Millfield Primary School in Cambridgeshire. The second recommendation of the EEF report highlights the importance of dedicating time for children to explore maths and to integrate this throughout the day. The key aspect of planning daily maths activities, consistent approach to introducing vocabulary and making the most of daily routines to engage children in mathematical thinking were all discussed during the first webinar. I shall refer back to these as I talk to you about the third recommendation in more detail, which talks about the role that manipulatives and representations play in developing children's understanding of maths. So what exactly do we mean by manipulatives and representations? Well-resourced early years classrooms are full of manipulatives, and you will find them in many different learning spaces within your environment. Simply, they are physical objects that children use to interact with to both support and extend their mathematical understanding and to show or represent their thinking. They include resources traditionally linked to maths, such as Numicon, Multilink, cubes, bead strings, deans, and so on, as well as everyday objects. Shells, pebbles, buttons, lolly sticks, pine cones are all just as useful when you're exploring mathematical ideas with young children. We also mustn't forget resources which support children to organise their counting, such as 10 frames and the part-whole model. Representation is how the maths is presented, whether it's children's drawings, mathematical symbols, or more formal representations such as number lines or graphs. This immediately throws up questions which link back to our thinking about learning environments and how we're supporting children to engage with manipulatives and representations as part of their everyday mathematical experiences. As practitioners, we need to reflect on whether the children have easy access to a wide range of manipulatives. Are there opportunities for children to explore manipulatives as part of their play? Do the adults within the setting support and extend this play? How do we encourage and support and develop the use of representations within this? And are the adults skilled in reflecting what the children's play and or representations tell them about their mathematical understanding and thinking? These are questions that we need to be thinking about and addressing within our teams. Manipulatives, as I'm sure you all agree, are a great tool for engaging young children in mathematical thinking. They make maths fun, practical and interactive, as well as supporting children to visualize number and make sense of abstract mathematical ideas and problems. One of the first manipulatives children will use are their fingers. Young children may even use their fingers to explore counting and represent numbers before they can say the corresponding number words. Fingers are not just about supporting early counting and representation numbers to 10. They support children to count on, for example, or count in groups, as well as help children to develop their understanding of place value. Now, after taking the register recently, I asked my class how many people were in school today. I explained that there were 25 children and 3 adults, and Logan told me that there were 28. Now, I asked him how he knew this, and I was expecting him to reply, I locked 25 in my head and I counted on 3 using my fingers. Instead, he held up 4 fingers on each hand and said, I know because double 4 is 8. Now, I questioned him a little bit more, and he explained that if 4 and 4 is 8, that means 5 and 3 is 8. So 25 and 3 must be 28. As he did this, he's used his fingers to show me. So as he bent one finger down on one hand, he held up another on his other hand. So he had 5 on one hand and 3 on the other. So Logan was not only using his fingers to make links in his mathematical thinking, but also he used them to explain what he was thinking. We need to think quite carefully about how we use manipulatives and representation and what effective practice looks like. The EEF report suggests some key considerations for us to look at. Children need to have opportunities to play with manipulatives. It is important that children are familiar with the resources before we ask them to use them to represent numbers or mathematical concepts. An obvious example, as you can see here, is Numicon. Once the children understand that each tile represents and shows a number, the children can then explore this at a deeper level. Children can be very distracted by new resources and can focus on the novelty value rather than its mathematical potential. This has obvious implications for our learning environments. We need to make sure that manipulatives are a central part of our everyday continuous provision, and that there is consistency both within a setting, but also across settings, such as nursery and reception where possible. This leads us into another question about which manipulatives to use. As the EEF report explains, we need to ensure that there is a clear rationale for using a particular manipulative or representation. As practitioners, we need to think carefully about the manipulative and how it will support the children in their understanding about a specific concept. At Millfield, we make sure there are always key manipulatives in the daily provision, but then we add provocations to stimulate further discussion and thinking. So manipulatives are freely available for the children to access as and when they need to, but we also plan provocations which link closely to our maths focus and build on what the children already know. We also ensure that these provocations are open-ended and can be accessed by children working at all levels. But is this enough? As Clements and Sarama explain in their research, The Myths of Early Math, having a well-resourced and organised environment or learning space for maths isn't in itself enough. They go on to explain that only intentional activities focused on mathematics appear to make significant contributions to children's learning. I think we would all recognise this when we think about more structured or taught maths opportunities within our settings, whether this is as a whole class or in small groups. This does not mean, however, that children's self-initiated play cannot support children's understanding for maths, but for children to be successful in exploring and developing this understanding, the role of the adult and their subject knowledge is absolutely key. We need to be supporting children to reflect on the manipulatives they are using and to make links with the mathematical ideas they are representing. This doesn't just happen. Both sustained shared thinking and guided interactions play an important part here. Modelling, questioning, asking children to elaborate, recapping and clarifying thinking are all so important. Now, this video shows two reception children at play in our outdoor maths area. Although they begin from the same starting point, their learning journeys take very different paths. Whilst you can only see a snapshot of the adult interactions here, think about the use of manipulatives in supporting the children to make links and develop their understanding, and what the role of the adult might have been within this. Okay, sorry about the sound there. Fred, as he was playing with the tens frames and through my questioning, I quickly realised that he was struggling with the concept that you start with the largest number first when you are taking away. And for me, it was important to address his misconception about this. So we revisited the part-whole model, and I was able to develop and support his understanding with this. Ruby's journey, on the other hand, was very much about number bonds and supporting her to make links and notice patterns within this. And by using a different version of the tens frame and through questioning, she explored this further and spotted those patterns. Now, as was clear in the video, supporting children to make links, we are ensuring that they develop a fuller and secure understanding of concepts and not just a recall of facts. When understanding is secure, children can then start to become more fluent and can work with numbers in a way which is more automatic, which in turn will lead to mastery. It is important for us to reflect on this when we think about the new early learning goal for number in the revised statutory framework, which includes automatically recall number bonds for numbers 0 to 10. The word automatic implies children just knowing the number facts. This does not mean that we should be focusing on rote learning. As we're all well aware, a child can learn something off by heart without fully understanding it. Another myth is that young children always need to do mathematics concretely. The link with using manipulative is very clear here, but what about other representations such as drawing, verbal explanations, or written symbols? One of the key considerations from the EEF guidance is that children should be encouraged to represent problems in their own ways. Now, as I play this video, and let's hope it works, think about how the children are representing their understanding through talk and drawings.
Three, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So Nancy, what did you notice?
I noticed that number 1 leads to 2, then 3, and then 2 leads to 3. Because every time it's one more. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Seven, 8, then 9. What? So the smaller numbers are getting bigger because there's one more. There's like 10 because it's getting smaller because there's less.
Although working in a group, the children were free to record their ideas in a way which made sense to them, and this supported their maths talk. Again, this links back to thinking about our learning environments and the role of the adult. Do your learning environments encourage and support children to record their ideas linked to maths and problem solving? Are there mark-making resources freely available in your maths spaces? As well as ensuring that all children have lots of opportunities to record their thinking, it's important that the adults not only model a range of ways to do this, but also value the children's own attempts at recording their ideas. As practitioners, we are often confident with valuing and supporting emergent writing, but what about early mathematical mark making? Whilst it can be useful to introduce children to symbols such as the addition and equal signs, as practitioners, we need to be careful that this does not distract from children devising their own representations. As you could see in the video, when children are free to do this, it can tell you so much about their thought processes and unpick where they are in their learning. The EEF guidance explains that children should be free to invent and explore their own representations to record their thinking and communicate their understanding. Now, this is a great example showing how powerful children's own representations can be. Oliver is a child who is fascinated by number. Here, he'd been exploring putting counters into piles all over the floor, and I asked him to show me on paper what he had found out. Initially, he recorded what he had done with the counters, but then continued without them. When I asked him to talk to me through his work, his response was 8 exectified by 5 is 40, 6 exectified by 5 is 30, and 3 exectified by 5 is 15, and so on. As he said the word exectified, he pointed to the zigzag mark that he had drawn. When I asked him what exectifying meant, he explained it's when you have piles of something like 3 piles of 4, that's the same as exectifying. Oliver had not only developed his own symbol and language for multiplication, but also used his own way of recording to explain his thinking. This leads us on to the final EEF consideration, to use manipulatives and representations to encourage discussion about mathematics. As we are all well aware, children can find it difficult to explain their thinking or how they solve the problem. Thinking back to the example I gave of Logan working out how many people were in the classroom, he was able to do this effectively by showing me using his fingers. As we have also seen in the videos, manipulatives and representations can be extremely useful in supporting children to talk about their thinking around maths. Encouraging children to work in pairs or small groups encourages talk. They can share ideas, talk about different strategies, and solve problems together. By doing this, we are encouraging children to question and develop a critical awareness, which in turn will support them to make connections and deepen their understanding. Finally, I wanted to share this video with you, which shows 2 children busy at work in our loose parts area. The children are at very different stages in their mathematical development, and whilst one child is clearly leading the play, the other is picking up so much from them. As you will see, Roman is very confident at talking about his thinking, which supports the collaborative learning taking place. I also think it's important to note the vital role that the whole learning environment plays in supporting children to engage in mathematical play at this level, whether we're talking about manipulatives and resources or the adults within the setting.
Yes, they could be the window. The high bit. Well, there's out to there.
Okay.
Wait, we can do these. How do we make it high? Wait, I got it. Make these for these. So these we can stand up, so we can stand the thing on top.
Okay.
No, I think we need to turn it all the way round. I think the other round will do. I think right now, yes, we did it. No, like that.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have another trolley like this. Yeah, we can do like this. We just need one more. Okay. We have another door to make it super high. So lots and lots of doors. About 50 doors.
How many?
50. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A door fell down.
Do you think you're going to get 50 doors on there, Roman?
We'll need to put some on the bottom as well. Big doors. Let me count all of them.
Go on then.
This is we need those here. We have those here. And what's in this base? 19. I know. This is 19 doors.
19?
Yeah, if you count them and them together, it makes 19. Castle needs to have another layer on here, Castle. They need to have about 3 layers. Castles have to be.
Do they?
Yeah, but we can't.
So how are you going to make another layer then?
No, that will be a bit tricky. We will need another layer here. Yes, we do. No, we made another layer. Okay. This is the one though. I'm going to stick it here.
So what have you done there, Roman?
And it's 10.
Number 10?
No, just that look like a tree.
Let's have a look, Jax. Yeah, it's a good job.
But my one is even better. No, I'm not.
So Roman, what number have you done now?
17 now.
70?
Yes. I can do like one. Of course I do. Like this. 17 is like this. 17.
What are you doing now, Roman?
100. We can use it.
That's a very big number, Roman.
Yeah, that's like 100. That's like a ginormous number. I'm the
Why did you count in tens?
because that's quick enough.
It's quick enough.
Because that's a bit faster.
It's a bit faster, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm now going to hand over to Jill, who will talk to you more about building on what children already know and the use of high quality targeted support to help all children be successful in maths.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jill Devlin and I lead the early years team at Chandos Primary School in Birmingham. In this final part of the webinar, I'll be discussing recommendations 4 and 5 from the EEF guidance report. These are ensuring that teaching builds on what children already know and the use of high quality targeted support to help all children learn mathematics. As we know, children enter our nursery and reception classes at different starting points, with some children not having had as a variety of rich mathematical experiences as others. This may be more key this year as we see the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Children have had variations in the disruption of their schooling, as well as limited preschool experiences. In June 2020, as schools started to reopen, only 23% of nursery children and 40% of reception children returned to their settings in England. Therefore, it is as important as ever that practitioners should carefully assess what children do and do not know in order to extend learning for all children. So, how can practitioners achieve this? The EEF states that a variety of methods should be used to assess children's mathematical understanding, such as observations. The use of observations in early years is no new initiative. However, making these observations high quality and purposeful is key. In my setting, as I'm sure in many of yours, we've invested a lot of professional development with staff to ensure that observations not only record what children know, but also what are their next steps for learning, so that we can plan effectively to move each child's learning on. As we move into a period of change in early years in England, I thought it was important to note what the EYFS Early Adopter Framework says about the use of observation for assessment. It states that ongoing assessment is an integral part of the learning and development process. It involves practitioners knowing children's level of achievement and interests, and then to shape teaching and learning experiences for each child reflecting that knowledge. As discussed by Alice in the first part of this webinar, a high understanding of mathematical thinking is required to interpret and use observation to inform teaching. Adults are the most crucial and indeed the most expensive resource that settings have to support and move children's learning on. Rose and Rogers, in their book, The Role of the Adult in the Early Years Setting, discusses the many roles that adults have, one being the observer. This in itself is a highly complex role, and it involves standing back and noticing what children do or say during their independent learning. But it is also knowing when is the right time to intervene and use discussion or questioning to gather more information on children's understanding, or indeed to scaffold new learning. It takes a highly skilled practitioner to be able to do this, as intervening at the wrong time may slow or stop learning. One of the ways settings can achieve this is to observe children throughout the day during independent learning. This gives practitioners time to see what learning children can do independently. There are numerous reports that advocate independent learning, particularly in the early years. The most high quality assessment information comes from observations of what children can do on their own, although it is important to note that effective early years practice requires a careful balance of child-led and adult-led learning. A question all early years practitioners should ask themselves is, does your environment allow for children to achieve the best possible independent learning? An enabling environment has a key role to play in this, and the most successful settings use the environment as an additional teacher. Practitioners should ensure that there are opportunities for children to explore and demonstrate their mathematical understanding throughout all learning areas, therefore creating greater opportunities to capture high quality observations. Although there is some value in having maths areas in our classrooms, to really maximise mathematics learning, it's crucial to have maths represented everywhere, including the outdoor learning environment. Using a wide range of real, open-ended and inspiring resources increase children's opportunities to develop their mathematics understanding. The use of real objects also allows children to demonstrate knowledge gained in their home environment, such as using real cooking skills, money, tape measures that they may have used at home with their families. Also in the report, it states that as early mathematical concepts take time to develop, observing a child demonstrating a mathematical skill does not necessarily mean that understanding is secure. It often takes time to consolidate learning and transfer it into different contexts. It's therefore important that we, as adults, ensure that children have the required environment, time, and opportunities to revisit learning on many occasions, making connections with other learning and applying it in different contexts. Children need to be observed in different situations to gain a fairer and more holistic perspective of their capabilities. This in turn helps adults to plan and facilitate future learning, not only in mathematics, but in all areas of learning. In the EEF guidance report, it recommends that when practitioners are discussing mathematics with children, they should listen carefully to children's responses and explanations, rather than focusing on a particular answer to a problem. Using open-ended questions such as, how do you know, and what did you do first, are the best way to gain further knowledge of the children's mathematical understanding. There is considerable research on the common errors that children make when they are learning to count. We will all have observed children in our settings counting objects twice, skipping over objects, missing number words, or saying number words in a different order. As practitioners, we naturally support children in these errors by gently making statements such as, remember that each object needs 1 point and 1 number word. The EEF report supports these are helpful for children, but if you consider the attention, the patience and the motor skills required for children to count, it is normal for them to make these errors. I know that all of you listening to this webinar will have seen children make these common errors, particularly when counting larger sets of objects. The EEF discusses that it's more important that practitioners encourage children to be enthusiastic counters. Enthusiastic counters rather than them worrying too much about the errors. We don't want children to become so reluctant to count. Early years adults should therefore use their professional judgment on when it is more appropriate to ignore these errors if the children are trying hard, and as well that they understand that correct counting requires 1 point and 1 word for each object. In addition to observing children in their independent play, the research from the EEF states that practitioners can also create carefully designed assessment tasks that can reveal children's understanding. This in turn can be used to support children's learning. However, it is important that when planning a task or an activity to collect this evidence, adults must plan exactly what they want to get out of the activity and then what they're going to use the information they collect for. Now that the early years practitioner has observed and recorded what children can and cannot do through observation, assessment activities and questioning, they step into another role. Rose and Rogers call this role the assessor in their book. Practitioners must now evaluate the evidence they have collected about children's mathematical knowledge and understanding and make judgments on what learning needs to come next. It is then that professionals should consider if the learning environment supports the children to achieve their identified next steps. Also, are the children motivated and inspired to develop their own mathematical learning through a wide range of learning opportunities? An effective learning environment should be constantly adapted for the needs of the children. As I discussed earlier, children enter our early year settings with a wide range of prior experience of mathematics and also of preschool experiences in general. Settings must focus on improvements to their mathematics provision that supports all children's understanding. However, some children may require targeted support to make progress. The EEF states that many children who need this additional support with early mathematics can return to a typical learning trajectory with varied teaching methods and targeted individual support. So, what does this support look like? The research recommends that it's most effective when it is brief but at regular intervals. Some of the evidence also indicates that time-limited interventions that are reviewed and amended frequently are also very effective. Thank you. I'll just pass over to Jo Clifton.
Thank you very much, Jill, and thank you also to Bilstley Research School, Alice Francis and Anne Hopkins for a really interesting session. I was particularly interested in joining in with this session because I know in my own career how much I struggled to understand how children learn in maths. And one of our participants today commented on how often we almost have an intuitive sense of how to encourage early writing, but early maths certainly takes more thought. And I know myself, I've had to learn with mathematics that it's less about process, but more about that deeper conceptual understanding in a really fascinating area. So far with Bilstley Research School, we've had evidence-informed practice webinars into the environment, into literacy, and today into maths. Now, the early years programme, which is on the screen in front of you now, is going into greater detail about early years effective practice backed by evidence. And you can see the overview there in front of you. You will receive an email shortly with further details about how you can sign up and get involved in a more detailed programme. So that's it from us today. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating journey. And do come along and join in with the programme.